Hello, everyone, and welcome to the second session of our four-part ITIL webinar series, Bridging the Gaps in IT Support, Solving Tier Separation with ITIL, presented by the Director of Americas at PeopleCert, David Cannon. My name is Mariela Salinas, and I'll be assisting in moderating our session today. We are in Zoom for today's webinar, and we will be sharing a copy of this recording with you in an email after the session. We do encourage participation throughout the session, so please use that chat or our Q&A option for our short Q&A after the presentation. Educate 360 is so excited to present this webinar today. So without further ado, I will hand it over to you, David.
Thank you very much, Mariela, and really good to be back here again. And hi to everybody who's attending, and to those who will be watching the recording later, hi to you too. Let's get straight to the subject of the day. This is part two of a series of making ITIL useful. And this series is all about organizations that have been using processes that may or may not have been based on ITIL in the past. They certainly look like they could have come from ITIL, but they don't work as well as they should have. So how can we make ITIL useful? And today we're going to be talking about about bridging the gaps that are sometimes caused by tier separation. So let's get straight into it. We're going to be covering what is tier separation. Then we're going to ask, when is it an issue? Because it's not always an issue. In fact, tier separation is a pretty good thing. And I'm going to explain why. But it can have gaps. And when there are gaps, it really doesn't work very well, and it causes all kinds of trouble. So what happens when there are gaps? How do you know you've got them? And then how do we fix the gaps? And to the point of what happens when there are gaps, very often these gaps have been around for quite some time, and you might have developed some ways of dealing with them or remediating them, it's kind of overcoming the symptoms of them. And you may feel that that's kind of the way things really are, and that's the way they should be, and you're just going to try and fix them as they come up. Actually, they shouldn't be there, and there are ways to fix that, and we're going to talk about those this afternoon. So how do we fix the gaps? Now, if you have questions, I will have time for questions at the end. You can also type questions in to the either the chat or the Q&A if you have them. I'll be happy to answer them as we go through or at the end of the session. So first off, what is tier separation? And I've said that this is not always a bad thing. And in fact, it is a pretty essential thing if you are doing support. Let's have a look at what it is. And you'll be very familiar with this when you see it. So first of all, it's a way of dividing teams. Uh, not everybody does everything in an IT group or any other technology group. You can't have everybody doing the same job. And so you have to divide the teams up in some way. There's a lot of ways we divide teams up in technology groups. We divide them up by technical specialization. We divide them up by the kind of applications and systems that they support. We divide them up potentially by the kind of architecture that they're supporting. So you may have one group that is supporting services in the cloud. You may have another one that's supporting on-premise servers. So there could be a number of ways that you divide up technology groups, and all of them have value. But when it comes to tier separation, you're making an additional division. You're not only dividing based on perhaps a technical specialization or a particular job that people are doing, you're also putting some level of expertise or some level of experience into the consideration. So this could be a technical specialization. So the more technically specialized are, the higher the tier that you will be put into. The more expertise and experience you have, the higher the tier. If you're working on very complex work that requires a lot of interface at a very technical level, you would be working at a higher tier. If your level of responsibility is very high and you need to be able to make decisions about the technology that you're using, how you're using it, what you're acquiring, and so on, you will find yourself in probably a higher tier. Now, I don't want this to sound like, high versus low, like that's a good versus bad kind of thing. It's not at all. We need skills at every single level, and I'll show you exactly why. In fact, let me show you what a typical tier looks like, tiering structure looks like. This you may find in any IT group, particularly on the infrastructure side, you'll find this, but also on the application side, cloud service support as well, you may find these tiers. Now, basically, the bottom tier there is a basic tier. I say basic, and this is what we hear people referring to it as very often. I don't really like the use of the word basic. It's one that's used frequently. So I'm going to challenge that a little bit, even though it's on the slide there. I'm going to challenge that a little bit and say, let's rather call these things tier one. Tier one is the first level of support that you get through to when you need something. So it may look basic, but actually the people who provide tier one support are generalists. They know a bit about a lot of things. And it's actually a really important skill set to have. The ability to be able to pick up a call, read an email, or get onto the online interface with a user and be able to give a meaningful answer to what they're asking you to. That takes a very special kind of skill. And it takes a very generalized approach to managing technology. So it is anything other than basic. But it is the first tier. It's the first group of people that we get in touch with. And sometimes it's not only people, sometimes we try to automate some of what those people do through chatbots and so on. I'll talk about that later. But it's the first level. Then what some people or a lot of people, if you look around and you read in the industry, you'll hear about the advanced level. Now, I'm keeping them in there not because I believe that they're better or worse, but because these terms are commonly thrown around, and I really want to challenge them a little bit. Advanced is really tier two. This is the level when, you've got tier one. They're dealing with a whole bunch of calls coming in, a whole bunch of emails coming in, a whole bunch of things that they need to pay attention to. They cannot spend too long on any individual call or any individual issue. And so some of those that are going to take longer or that are going to require a little bit more specialized technical knowledge are going to need to be sent through to somebody else. And that is the second tier or the second level of support. Then we have the expert. And our expert, I don't really have too much of a problem with because these people are really specialists. They're focused in on a particular technology, a particular application, a particular product, a particular service. They know more about that thing than pretty much anybody else in the organization. They are the people that you go to when nobody else knows what to do. So now you don't want them working on too many things because they're probably busy designing the next generation of what's going to bring revenue into the business. So you don't want to distract them too much. They're tier three. So they're the third level of support that we go to when we need them. Then there is sometimes called level four, or sometimes called the external level, which is when somebody in our organization there's nobody in the organization that can answer the question. It may be an issue with the application that you're using. It may be an issue with the infrastructure service in the cloud, but it can only be fixed by the provider of that service or that product. In which case we need to be able to escalate and get it to that supplier in some way. Now, it shows here that there are only four levels. You can have as many or as few as you like. It all depends on your organization, how complex you are, how structured you are. But typically, we find most organizations tend to organize themselves into more or less four layers. There may be sub layers within these. Now, what's interesting about these layers is that sometimes they are physical departments. So we have level one sitting on a service desk, and that is all that that service desk does is they're doing level one support. They're answering general queries, they're performing triage, they're handling things that they can, and those that they don't have time for or they don't have the expertise for, they're handing off to tier two. So sometimes these are very different teams, and other times they're really they're virtual. You would look at them, they're all sitting in the same place. They all seem to be doing the same kind of thing, but every individual on that team is actually performing a different role. Some are taking the first calls, some are performing triage, some are answering some of the more detailed queries. And you may even find in those situations that people on those tiers rotate. So not everybody sits on tier one and takes those first calls every week. They may spend a week doing that, then they may spend 2 weeks doing more tier two kind of work. It all varies. Now, the exact structure of your organization is not as relevant here. What is most important here is how you allocate work across the tiers. Tiering is really important, and I will show you why. It makes sure that you're getting the right person working on the right task at the right time. You don't want to be wasting time by sending a task or getting somebody to work on a task that they don't have knowledge about or that they don't have time for. So tiering is a way of making sure we're getting the work to the right person as quickly as possible, or not as quickly as possible, but within the time frame that is optimal for that kind of work. It also, as I've just said, optimizes the time and focus. And I'm going to be talking about how that works in a moment. But it means that we don't have everybody working on everything. You don't have everybody handling every query that comes in, every incident that comes in, every change request that comes in, every service request that comes in. No, you actually deal with things in a way that makes you efficient, in a way that makes you provide the right kind of service to the person who's asking for something. The third thing that tier separation does is it really helps us to define roles and responsibilities. I don't know if you've been in the organization and you're working on something, really important. You're on a project, you're working on something really key. It is in depth, it is technical. You really have to get it out. You're under time pressure and everybody's waiting for what it is that you're busy doing, whether it's coding or whether it is configuring, whatever it is that you're busy doing to get it ready to go live. And people keep knocking at your door and saying, "Hey, can you please just take care of this? Can you please just come and do this for me? Hey, so and so asked if we could do this. Can we?" There's got to be clarity. If your role and your responsibility is to be working on something in depth against the deadline, and that thing is more important than anything else, you need to be dedicated to that. You need to be put in an environment where you're not disturbed, where you're not being distracted by things that belong to another role. So tiering helps us to define these roles and expectations from people a lot more clearly. If I am in tier three, you can certainly expect a much higher level of, or much in-depth level of technical support. You can expect me to spend longer on the call, but then I will also tell you that in order to do that, I'm going to have to put aside something else, and I may need to get approval to do that so that I can take care of what you're asking for. I need the freedom to be able to do that. If I'm at tier one, I don't want you sitting with me for 4 hours going through in-depth technical specifications and configurations when there are 20 calls lined up on the help desk line there. If let's say it's a phone call, but or a bunch of emails sitting in my inbox, or a bunch of tickets coming through our system, and all of them are expecting you to answer those within minutes. So no, there needs to be some very clear expectations about the roles and responsibilities, and tiering really helps. It's one way that we can use to set those roles and responsibilities clearly. Another thing that tiering does is it helps us achieve balance between customer focus and technology focus. Now, here's something that you may or may not know, but the original help desk came out in about the 1980s, when help desk first started becoming popular. Believe it or not, as young as I look, I was around then. And the first help desks were not actually specialized departments as we know them today. The first help desk was A bunch of technical operators sitting in the data center trying to get batches to run and program submitted on punch cards and all this kind of thing. And people would come to the window at the front of the data center and ask, "Hey, do you have the printout I sent yesterday?" and this kind of thing. And these guys were typically technical geeks like me would get really tired of this because they kept getting interrupted from doing stuff that they felt was way more important. So what they did is they started putting in place a system whereby somebody would be at that window in the data center. And it was their job to take those queries. And that was one of the early forms of help desks or service desks over there. And what it was a way of achieving the balance between customer focus and technology focus. The people in the back could focus 100% on the technology, go through all of the routines that they need to go through. They didn't have to worry about getting disturbed. The person at the front who understood how the technology worked could provide meaningful support to the person at the window, understand what it was that they needed, tell them when they could get it if they couldn't do it immediately. So they were able to achieve that good balance instead of what happened in the early days of, "Hey, can't you see we're busy? Not now. We'll get back to you." And then they would forget to get back to them. So this was a really good way of balancing that sort of technical specialization with that front office support where the customers felt that they were getting taken care of. And tiering has developed and evolved into a much more sophisticated way of working where we can actually balance in real time between the demand that's being placed by technical activities and the requirements that our customers are expecting from us. The other cool thing about tiering is it gives us a career path. There are a lot of people who like to start generalists, and some of them will stay generalists for the rest of, they'll retire as generalists because they love the challenge of coming into something new every single day, or even, in fact, in sometimes every 10 minutes. They absolutely love that. And I know a lot of people who started in first level support and they retired from first level support and they loved every minute of it. But a lot of people want to grow their career into more technical specialization or they want to grow it into management. And tiering is a way to help them do that because what it does is it gives them some objectives to say, if you want to get to tier two and you want to be a tier two specialist in a particular area, then these are the skills you need to develop. The nice thing about that is because this organization is part of an enterprise, the skills that you'll be developing are skills that are relevant and needed for your organization. So tiering is a really good way to help people grow their careers, whether it is grow them as a generalist in tier one or whether it is to grow them and become more technically specialized in through tier one and tier three. Of course, we hope they don't leave us and go and join the supplier, but that could happen too. Final thing about why we need tier separation, it is easier to track and manage work. It may not sound like a good thing that we have enough bosses breathing down our necks. Yeah, sometimes it feels like that. But it is way worse to have a boss breathing down your neck because nobody knows who's doing what, and they're trying to find a guilty party. Because by the time they find the person who's taking care of that, they are mad as anything, and they're looking for somebody to blame. No, it's much easier if somebody can say, "Who's working on this?" "Ah, so and so." "Hey, how far are you?" "Okay, cool. Let me know if you need any help." It's much better to work that way. And so by tracking and managing work through the tiers, we know exactly where something is. We know who's working on it. We know whether they're going to need any help, and we know how to get it to them. So tier separation is a really good thing. Let me start out by saying that. Here's what it looks like. There we go. Notice I've changed the terminology. We now have tier one, two, and three. Generally, I did some research and I found in the industry that approximately this is the percentage of IT staff or support staff, I should say, staff meaning FTEs that are working at each of these three tiers. 65%, and this could be 60%, it could be as high as 75%. It just depends on the call volume and the type of calls, what your first call resolution targets are and so on. But this is generally the kind of the number of people that are working there. Wow, that's a lot of people working on tier one. That's not a whole lot of people working on tier three. Why are there so many down on tier one and so many down on tier three? Well, it's actually very, it's quite scientific actually. And these ratios don't happen by mistake. They're developed not only by formula, but they're also developed by experience. The more experienced your service desk is, and your support teams are, the more you will know how many people need to handle the call volume. So as you can see on tier one, we have a larger number of incidents that we have to deal with. We're dealing with everything that comes through the virtual door. We're dealing with queries, we're dealing with password resets, we're dealing with requests for service, we're dealing with people who say, how do I access this system? We're dealing with everything. We're dealing with people who are saying, I've got a business critical issue here. I cannot function. We're losing money. You need to fix this thing, right? Everything is coming through tier one. And so the number of incidents is large. Therefore, you need a lot more people sitting there, and you need them to be able to handle those calls. Now, I say a lot more people, also a lot more automated activity. I'm going to talk about automation and chatbots in a moment. Don't worry, I haven't forgot about them. We're AI friendly here. So we're going to talk about chatbots. We're going to talk about AI tools in a moment. But right now, the theory of tiering and why tier one is so broad, that's why. But it has another impact as well. And the other impact is that the time that you spend per incident, because the call volume is very high on tier one, the amount of time you get to spend per incident or it doesn't only have to be an incident, per a query, let's just call them an incident for now. The amount of time that you spend per call is going to be much shorter because you've got a lot of calls to get through, whether those are virtual calls, whether they're telephone calls, whether they're people coming through a door. The number of calls you have to get through are much higher. Therefore, you have a lot less time to spend on them. But the implication then is that because tier three is handling fewer of these kind of issues, they will be spending more time. And actually, they need to be spending more time because the issues, by the time they get to tier three, we understand now it is probably a complex issue that needs to be resolved. And we need a little bit more time to focus on it. Now, I did say incident here. You'll see there. I'm just using incidents as an example. These could also be service requests. They could be, they could be change requests if you're using your service desk for change requests. So any kind of process that has a single point of entry follows this pattern. Okay, now let's have a look at that's how optimizing incident handling specifically. It could be also any kind of call that comes through. Now let's also look at how tier separation helps to clarify focus and activity. Now, if you were to take, these are the tiers. I couldn't fit the names of the tiers and all of these activities in, so please bear with me. You'll see at the top there is the supplier, that's the blue, and then it turns to green, and tier one is where it says support, and you have tier two and three in between. Typically, well, very broadly, okay, and let's not get into an argument about whether this is an agile sprint or whatever, but very broadly, we tend to find that tier one, two, and three resources work on these kind of activities. Right? So there is a supplier, they supply, right? We understand that. Somewhere between the supplier and the very most technical, specialized people in our organization is a team or individual who's going to be architecting and designing what it is that we're going to be managing. These could be services, they could be products, they could be infrastructure, they could be applications, they could be in the cloud, they could be on-prem, but somebody is designing and architecting them. We're then building or acquiring the solution, whatever that means. Building could be configuring, it could be creating something from scratch, it could be acquiring, we're gonna buy it. We then deploy it. We deliver the service that is based on that solution, and we have to support in case anything else is needed. So access to that service, incidents related to that service, requests for the service, and so on. So that's typically the kind of activity that the different tiers will be involved in. So you see that tier three is very busy with architecture, design, building and acquiring. Somewhere between building, acquiring, deploying, and delivering is tier two. Then somewhere between delivery and support is tier one. We do find in some cases that deployment, certain things can be deployed immediately from tier one. So this is not a rule. It's really just a broad idea of the fact that different tiers have different types of activity that they typically get involved in. So when we tier like this, it helps to clarify if I'm on tier three, I can expect to be doing architecture, design, build, acquisition type work. If I'm on tier two, I can expect to be doing somewhere between building and maybe configuration, deployment, and delivery. If I'm on tier one, depending on my organization, I should be expecting to be involved in the delivery of services and the support of those services, or one or the other. It just depends how your organization is structured. So tiering really helps us to do this. Now, there's something really important here. And this, normally we stop here. Okay, so you team tier three, you're doing architecture design. You on team two, you take stuff that's been built and you move it into into live environments, deploy it to the users, whatever the case is, right? And that's it. But for incident and problem management specifically, to a degree also for service requests and change management, there are two additional activities that are required. And we very often forget this. So when I said we're going to be talking about how we fix the gaps, I'm actually all the way through this presentation, I'm going to be talking about this. I do have a couple of slides at the end which talk about how to fix the gaps, but I'm also going to be talking about how to fix the gaps as we go through these slides. So first gap is when the tiers do not communicate effectively through this life cycle. So if somebody architecting and designing, but not telling the tiers below them, sorry, not below, below on the diagram, not telling the tier two groups that what that looks like, why they made certain decisions. If this happens, you should be doing that. They're not educating them. So when something goes wrong, the tier two team and the tier one team really have to do troubleshooting from the beginning. So that's a gap. But there's a gap in education that's happening. There's a gap in knowledge that's happening between tier three, two, and one. That has to be fixed. And the way we fix it is by building education cycles, iterative education cycles through this entire virtual life cycle, right? And these cycles are very simple. They're learn, do, make sure that what you've learned is working, and then teach. And we repeat that all the way through. And you notice there's more than just tier one, two, and three here. This happens no matter how many teams you have, and they don't have to be, you may have two two tier two teams. They need to be both working together to get to learn, do, and teach whoever else is in the chain, whoever else has a dependency on that service. Really important that this chain of learn, do, cheat, learn, do, teach, not learn, do, cheat. Please don't do that. Learn, do, teach is repeated throughout the tiering in every case where supply, architecture, building, deployment, delivery, and support are performed through the tiers. It's really critical. Why? If we don't do it, we don't have knowledge articles. We have people on tier one taking calls from users and customers and who are not able to provide effective support on that first call. They cannot triage those calls properly. In other words, they don't really know who should be dealing with that at tier two or tier three, so it gets allocated incorrectly. All of that as a result that there is a gap in education between the tiers. So very important. The second gap, and this is one that we're experiencing now with chatbots, told you I'd come back to them, is the automate, do, optimize cycle. So what we do here is, we've invested in a solution. We've automated, right? It's digital. It is automated. we implement it, or we implement that step. And then we figure out, is there a better way of doing that? Optimize. We find the better way of doing it, we try it, and then we automate it. And we keep going through the loop. Now, here's the thing when it comes back to chatbots. In many organizations, chatbots are seen as the thing that is done by level one, right? Tier one. Chatbots belong to tier one. Actually, it couldn't be more wrong. If a chatbot is going to work effectively, it is going to depend on effective automation from tier three to tier two to tier one. Your chatbot, to be effective, needs to understand, and it goes back into the knowledge cycle as well. It goes back into that learn, do, teach cycle as well. So a chatbot depends on the automate, do, optimize, and the learn, do, teach cycles working effectively. Otherwise, the chatbot doesn't get trained and it cannot provide effective service. So whatever you do in your organization, do not leave it up to your service desk to define your whole chatbot strategy. Just because it is first level doesn't mean that the service desk is the only one that works with a chatbot. Everybody needs to be involved if it's going to work effectively. Right. So there's a couple of gaps that we've identified, and I've given you some idea on how to fix those gaps. And it really comes down to communication. It comes down to, I'm sorry to say it, documentation, showing exactly what you've done and being able to give access to that documentation to others, either at the same tier or at another tier. And by the way, documentation sounds like an awful word. It is. Documentation doesn't necessarily mean manuals. It could mean knowledge articles. It could mean notes in problem records or change records. It just means there needs to be a way of effectively communicating what you have learned or what you have automated through to other people in the life cycle and bots in the life cycle. Okay, next. How do we use tier separation for incident and problem management? And this is a really important one. I think probably, no, I'm not going to say it's the most important. Everything is important that we're going to talk about today, but this is really key. The difference between incident and problem management through the tiers, right? Because here's what happens, and I'm going to come to this a little bit later. What happens in many organizations is they say, well, incident management belongs to tier one because they're handling all the first level kind of calls that come in, which is all incidents. So incident management belongs to level one, and problem management belongs to tier three. Tier two is kind of, I don't know what they do. In this model that has been defined, they kind of fit in somewhere between the two and very often find themselves getting in the way. They're doing too much to be incident managers because they're really trying to prevent problems, but they don't have enough time to focus and enough technical responsibility or access to be able to fix those really complex problems. So they're not really doing problem management. It is hugely frustrating for people stuck between those two sort of levels of problem management up there and incident management over there. It's hugely frustrating. And it is hugely frustrating for the people in tier one and tier three as well. Why? Well, because the people in tier one are dealing with every single thing that comes through that call as through that service desk as if it is the first time it's ever happened. Because there's no records, there's no trend, there's no knowledge article. There's all we're doing is solving incidents. On the other hand, it's hugely frustrating for tier three. They're being expected to improve the quality of the systems that they manage and that they're responsible for, but they have no record of frequency of failures, where those failures occurred, what was done to fix them, and so on. If it was done on tier one or tier two, the tier three don't even bother to look at it because that's not their domain. That is a major gap. It's one of the biggest gaps that we see in organizations today. And what's really interesting is that some of these organizations will tell you, we used ITIL to define incident management. We used ITIL to define problem management. And yet, these two processes don't communicate or intersect hardly at all. Maybe they use the same tool. I'm being extreme, but let me tell you, I'm not far off in some cases. There are some organizations that really struggle with this. We have engineers who refuse to touch an incident record. Incidents are not my job. I only deal with quality improvement. And if you want to call that problem management, okay. You have level one people who are saying, I can't do root cause analysis because I'm not allowed to, because that belongs to some tier two or some tier three group. What absolute nonsense. Root cause analysis is part of incident management. If you can't determine what the root cause is, you can't fix the incident. So that just doesn't work. That whole separation between incident and problem management just doesn't work. However, the focus is different. The focus of incident management is how do you restore service following a disruption? The focus on problem management is how do you prevent service disruption? So problem management is more proactive. Incident management is more reactive. I say more, not totally, right? More. Um, Both of them depend on incident records being accurately and completely captured. You cannot prevent service disruption if you don't have a record of what the disruptions in the past were. You cannot restore service if you don't know what you need to do to restore the service, i.e., problem or workaround. So these two processes, and in ITIL 4 we call them practices because they're not just processes, they're also people and tools. They have to work together. The incident management practice works from tier one into tier three. The problem management process or practice works from tier three into tier one. But it's cyclical. They keep complementing each other. They keep working in tandem with each other. Incidents feed our understanding of problems. Problems feed our understanding of how to solve incidents, how to prevent them. So they have to work together. You cannot, I'm going to stress this, I cannot stress this strongly enough. You cannot have a group of tier three individuals refusing to deal with incidents or even refusing to complete incident records completely. Otherwise, neither of these practices work. So I'll stress that and let's move on because thanks, Michael, for that comment. I've never worked in government then. Where do you think I learned this stuff? I'm kidding. I can tell you, Michael, if you're concerned about the inefficiency of government, let me tell you, government is not alone in this. There are many commercial organizations facing exactly these issues. So, but there you go. Yeah, I have to be politically correct, of course. You know, let's just move on. Right. All right. When does tier separation become an issue? And I've already told you a couple of these things, and I've already told you what the gaps are. I have also given you some idea of how to solve that by integrating problem and incident management across the teams. Now, I'd like to cover that one in a little bit more detail. This is a purely theoretical organization. Please, let's not get into the discussion about integration between product teams and infrastructure teams and clouds. This is purely theoretical. Okay, these could be cloud, they could be anything, right? I just wanted some boxes up here that broadly describe the kind of work that we do in IT. All right, so we have an IT service desk, and in this particular organization, they have allocated incident management to the service desk, and the service desk owns incident management. That's it. Right. And we have this scenario here. We have an engineering group and you have an application support group, and they have developed their own version and flavor of problem management. The one is called problem management. The other one is defect management, which is a different application of problem management. They both do similar things. They're not quite the same, but they both work in that area of root cause and detection, elimination. Right, so that's over there. And the problem on this team is this. Those orange blocks over there say we don't manage incidents. We'll fix them if you escalate them to us, but we'll set the priority because only we know what we're working on. Don't you tell us this is urgent. We'll decide if it's urgent. And by the way, you, service desk, do not know enough, right? Here comes this negative tiering aspect, right? Level one is down there, level three is up there. We're level three, you're down there. Don't you tell us where we've got a problem. How dare you? You don't know enough, right? This is that negative aspect of tiering. That's what tiering is for, right? People in tier one often know more about what is going on than the people in tier three because they're close to where the action is happening in the business. So that statement, and I've heard it so many times. Let me tell you, I've heard that statement several times. I'm sure you have as well. You don't know enough to tell us we have a problem. It could not be further from the truth. That attitude has got to be changed very quickly. And then the final thing is we don't do self-help or knowledge articles. Those are for incidents. We deal with problems. And you then end up with, I'm just going to call it knowledge leakage, where you don't have those learn, do, teach cycles happening. Now, the only way to deal with this is to identify roles and responsibilities across all teams related to incident management. Now, it's okay if process or practice ownership sits with service desk, but the process itself has to move across the silos. You cannot silo processes, and that's what they've done here. You have to identify whether you want to use a RACI, whether you want to use in fact, I've got a really cool idea. I'm going to talk about it a little bit later on. It's called a value stream. And ITIL 4 is all about value streams, and I'll show you why value streams are going to help you fix this. But there's a gap. I'm going to show you a little bit how to fix it. Now, I'm not on this presentation. We don't have time to go into all of the standard things like, get management support, make sure you have enough budget, put a communications plan. We know that stuff, okay? I'm assuming we know that stuff. If you don't, please go onto your favorite AI tool and ask them how to solve problems of organizational groups not communicating well or not working well together. You'll get a stock standard answer. I'm not going to cover that. I want to focus in on the things that you won't learn by just doing an AI chat or a search. So here's another one. Here's a big fire that's happened. Right, here's your service desk. Oh, that's an incident. Let's record it. Your security team finds out about it because one of their key systems that's on their asset registry has shown that it has gone red or yellow. Oh, that's a security incident. We're going to start a security incident management process, and you're going to get this whole thing through, and we're going to prevent all those bad players from hacking into our organization, etc. And then the Network Operations Center sees one of their screens sort of flashing on and off in the corner over there. Oh, we've got an exception over there. You have the same thing happening, and you have three different groups. And this is best case because you've probably got some other groups around. I haven't even mentioned the customers and the users yet, having detected this. Um, but we've got three different ways of interpreting what's happened here. It's an event, it's a security incident, it's an incident. What is the truth? The truth is, it's kind of all three. All three groups need to be aware and all three groups need to be involved, but only one group needs to take responsibility. Which one? If these three groups are not tightly in sync with one another, you're going to have duplicated activity, you're going to have a lack of communication, and you're going to have a disaster. So it's really important that the incident management and the problem management practices are linked between at least these three groups. So that when you have an incident, you can evaluate whether it is in fact a security incident. When you have an exception, you can validate that it has resulted in an incident being created. So linkage between the groups, linkage between the tools that they're using, and linkage between their processes. Very important. Right, here's another one. When two or more technical groups are involved, never a good thing. In other words, it got through the service desk. Service desk said, oh, well, there's a network issue here and there's a storage issue. I am going to send it to both teams at the same time. I'm not going to tell them who's got to take responsibility for what. I'm going to let them figure that out for themselves. Well, you know what happens. Oh, that's not us. You speak to the network guys. Oh, network. That's not us. You speak to the storage guys. Oh, network and storage. That's not us. You speak to the security team. This is not feasible. If you're going to have more than one team involved, more than one technical group involved, there have to be very clear instructions in that incident about what they are responsible for, what steps they need to take. Now, not necessarily technical steps, but what they are responsible for doing to resolve that incident. That has to be very clearly agreed. Now, if it does not exist, if we're not sure, then the very first thing that needs to happen is those two teams need to get into the same room and figure out who's going to do what. If they don't, it continues going backwards and forwards. Now, the other thing that we find happening is that, if groups want to insist on working in their own way, we're going to start getting duplicated tools. We're going to start getting duplicated tickets. They may not even be using the same tool. So not just two different instances of the same tool. One may be using, I'm not even going to mention names, one tool and the other one mentioned another tool. Lack of coordination between them. And just as bad as all of that, they define their priorities different. Oh, yeah, no, I think this is urgent. Well, I don't. I think this is more routine. And suddenly you have two different groups working on the same incident, but working at different paces, not being coordinated. Yeah. So key there is get them working together as far as possible. Coordinate the activity through a single parent incident record. If they are using different tools, make sure that both of those tools are linked in so that it can update the incident record. Make sure that escalation paths have been agreed with the managers of both of those teams. Okay, I'm going to start accelerating a little bit because I think I got too excited at the beginning. When allocation and escalation are not defined, this is a great one. Well, if you haven't defined for the people on the service desk or in tier one who should be dealing with a certain type of request or incident, then what happens is anything that's more complex than just a simple yes or no answer or a simple, yeah, I know what I'm doing, I'll fix this for you, becomes a major incident. Because that's the way we get people into the same room so that we can figure out what's going on. And I spoke to an organization this week, in fact, who said quite proudly, we have 5 major incidents a week. I'm like, how are you guys still in business? 5 major incidents. You have catastrophic failure 5 times a week. That's one a day. How do you can? No, no, we didn't have catastrophic business failure. We just needed to get everybody in the same room because we couldn't figure out who needed to do what. So everything suddenly becomes handled by this major incident management project. That's not healthy. Think of all the time you're wasting getting all of those people into the room when they could have been working on fixing real things or answering real service requests. So, yeah, that's not a healthy situation. It is much better to, again, going through that learn and do and teach cycle. Who should we be allocating to? Who should we be escalating to? And by the way, escalation should be automatic. You should never ask permission to escalate. If a time threshold has been reached or if an action has not been picked up, it is escalated automatically. Uh, it avoids delays to escalation to resolution, and it avoids the situation where people don't feel good about ratting their buddies out so they don't kind of escalate. No, it's just automatic. That's the most healthy way to do it. All right, here's another one. What happens when incident and problem management are separated? I gave you a chart which showed you that. Well, some other things that come into this are the pain value of a problem is difficult to estimate, to calculate. So, I get a problem. I'm told I've got to find a root cause and I've got to come up with a solution. And I'm told that if I can do this, it's going to prevent future incidents. Okay. What kind of incidents? Who do they impact? How much money do I need to spend on this and how quickly do I need to work on it? I don't know because I don't know what the pain value is. I don't know what the impact is on my organization. So I need to have information about incidents to be able to calculate things like pain value. my problem prioritization is not based on the impact to the organization. It's based on technical stuff, right? Like, hmm, um, who do I need to get hold of from the vendor to do this? Are they going to be available? I'll prioritize it according to their availability, right? As opposed to, hey, this is really important and we need to get this solved because every day we're getting 100 new incidents because of it. I'm going to escalate through to that supplier, right? So we've really got to match up the incidents to the problems, and that there needs to be those clear, consistent use of categorization across problem records and incident records, consistent completion of incident records so we know what's been done, and consistent completion or preparation of knowledge articles. Yeah, automation. I told you about chatbots. I've seen this again. How many times have you been on a website and they got the little chat buddy going over there? Hey, ask me anything, I'll help you out. And you ask them a question, and they come at you with some off the wall answer that has nothing to do with it happened to me last week when I was flying, and I'm like, I needed to know what the alternative flights were for because I had a delay on one of my flights, and I said, what are the alternative flights to flight number? And they gave me a whole rundown about all of the routes they fly to and the wonderful vacations you can have. And it's like, I don't need to know that. Yeah, but that's how we configured our chatbot because we weren't keeping it up to date with what was happening in the context of this organization. So what happens when there are gaps? Just a summary. I've really covered this, but just to give you a summary for the record, repeat and bouncing incidents, so we can't agree who takes responsibility. So it just goes from one group to another. Increased business downtime, customers aren't happy, there's duplication, there's inefficiency. People don't like to work in organizations where there are gaps, and it doesn't matter which tier you're working in. It is just not healthy. We just, yeah, it's not. You've been there, I'm sure. Well, I can't make that assumption. I'm sure all of your organizations are doing just fine, but somewhere in the past, otherwise you wouldn't be attending this webinar. You've probably experienced how difficult it is to work in an organization where there is no expectation or too many expectations on whichever tier you're working in. Self-help tools don't work, as I've just explained, and you have increases in major incidents, and it doesn't matter whether they're major or not. It doesn't look good. Okay. Uh, there's a question in the chat. Let me just answer that. Are you seeing incidents being owned by the service desk entirely, or tickets changing ownership ultimately resolved by the last team? Yes, it's more the last one. What we tend to see is now, if it's functional, of course, the service desk retains ownership and tasks or sub incidents, whatever you're going to call them, kind of allocated out to teams, or they all have access to the master record and they're updated as they complete their activity in the workflow. But what we're seeing where it doesn't work well is that the service desk will escalate a ticket, close it on the service desk, and it gets opened on the allocated team. That way they keep their SLAs nice and tight. They don't delay, and everybody gets to work on prioritizing their work in their way. It's not a great way to work. Again, it just results in things being lost, and it results in incidents taking too long to resolve. So yeah, neither of those is a good option, but of the ones I've seen, it's the second one that is most prevalent. Thank you for the question. Um, yeah, swarming complex. Yeah, Mitch, thank you for that. Swarming is something that was, yeah, I think it came out of actually a couple of different places, but out of Agile and DevOps. And it's a great technique when you have a complex incident. Instead of creating a major incident, swarm around on whichever tier is working on it, just swarm, get the right people to take a look at it. Anybody who doesn't have anything more urgent to work on, hey, let's get together and figure out what's going on here. Thanks, Mitch, for that. So that's a great way to plug that gap. Right? How do we fix them? Now, I told you I've really covered most of this, so I'm going to just give you a couple of hints here. First way is through value streams. Value streams are a way where you have multiple technology groups that are scattered through the business collaborating on how to support the business of how to support the enterprise. All of these organizational units, by the way, are business units. Some of them are stronger on IT, some of them are weaker on IT, but they all collaborate. How do they use incident management? How do they allocate incidents across one another? According to the value stream. So we can even create a value stream for incident management that allows us to raise incidents and run them across multiple teams, each of whom are using their own procedures to resolve their step in the incident and yet still maintain integrity so that we can manage the time from start to close. So value stream is a great way. Information is there in ITIL. I'm not going to cover this in too much detail. If you want to know more detail, um, get a hold of a recording of or visit the New Horizons website and look at the first webinar in this series where I discussed that. Here's another one. This is my favorite, SLAs. We love to use that word SLA, and every good tool has a field for SLAs. It really is not the best way to think about SLAs. Here's why. Customers have expectations about what the service does, how it performs, and what their experience should be when using it. We translate those expectations into an SLA. Now, an SLA doesn't have to be a document. It could be the description in the service catalog. It could be a discussion that you've had with the manager who's now communicated that to the team. It could be an email, but somewhere that expectation has been set. And there is an expectation from that user that when they're using the service, these are the things that are going to happen. Now the service breaks. So we create an incident and we assign a priority. And the first thing the tool does when you assign a priority, it sets an SLA, 4 hours to resolution. Let me be very clear, that is not a service level agreement. I don't care what the tool calls it. It is an incident resolution target or an incident resolution agreement. It is not a service level agreement. And here's why. The service level agreement, the SLA field in your incident record, in your ticket, is not based, in most cases, on what's written or has been agreed in the service level agreement with the customer. They're different. Because in the service level agreement with the customer, it will tell you how long they have before they start feeling the impact of downtime, right? Is that what you've documented in the SLA field? No, you've just documented a resolution time. Anybody else who looks at that incident record from then onwards, all they're going to see is the target resolution time. They're not going to see what the impact of that is on that particular service for that particular customer. And it gets worse. When that gets escalated or allocated, you're one step removed. Now you're looking purely at incident resolution time. You have no idea of what the actual service level agreement is. It's led to something in the industry which today is being called XLA or experience level agreement. Honestly, if you're doing service level agreements the right way, you wouldn't need an XLA because you would be including that linkage between what's in your incident record and what you've agreed with your customer. So how do we fix that? There you are. I'm going to let you read that because we're reaching the end. In fact, we're just on time. But there are ways in which you need to link the incident and the type of incident that is being experienced to the experience of the customer who is experiencing the downtime. So next steps. I just want to announce this. I had to get to this. Excuse me. Really cool. New Horizons, for every ITIL 4 Foundation course that you get from New Horizons from September 1st, they are including free of charge a year-long subscription to PeopleCert Plus. In that subscription, you get every single ITIL book that has been published is in that subscription. You get access to it. You can download it onto your iPad or whatever your favorite tablet is. You get access to exclusive webinars. Free take two. Failed the exam the first time, it's happened to me. Don't worry, you get a second shot at it and it's free. Free mock exams. You're nervous about it, you want to try it, see what it's like under real conditions, you got a chance to do that. It's free. White papers, templates, case studies, all are included in this product, and it will be free to you when you buy a foundation course from New Horizons. So please make use of that. When is the next foundation course? These are the guaranteed to run in August. You want to see the September ones? I think Mariella can give you some details about where to look for those. And really appreciate your time. Thank you very much. And in fact, there you go. Mariella has put some links into the chat. Please take a look at those and please make use of these great offers. Thank you very much for your time. Please feel free to reach out if you have questions. I'm on LinkedIn, or reach out through the New Horizons folks, and they will be sure to help. Thank you all very much for your time.
And thank you, David, for all your amazing insights. So I just wanted to let our audience know right before we leave if they want to learn a little bit more about this topic, or want to learn a little bit more about the other parts of this series. I went ahead and dropped some links in the chat so you can take a peek at those September dates, the free ITIL download, all of the amazing ITIL stuff. So thank you all so much for joining us today. And thanks again, David, for everything.
Thank you very much.
Alrighty, everyone. Have a fantastic rest of your week, and we will hopefully see you very soon in the classroom. Bye for now.
Bye.